About 3 or maybe 4 years back, I had this cool adventure, and I always enjoy exploring new places and trying out new things. But this adventure was unlike any I'd ever had before. It happened during the summer in Tennessee, out in the countryside near the ancient Bell Witch Cave. Everybody in our area knows about the stories surrounding that place. Some folks totally believe in them, while others are more skeptical. I was somewhere in the middle, not quite sure what to think. We've all grown up listening to tales about the witch and the mysterious stuff in that cave, so I guess I wanted to find out if there was any truth to it. I picked a night when the full moon was shining bright, but whether real or not, those old stories have a way of captivating you. There's something about the possibility of encountering something supernatural under the eerie glow of a full moon that's just fascinating. I remember when I got to the entrance of the cave. The moonlight made long shadows all around, and it was kind of spooky. I shook off a shiver, gathered my courage, and stepped inside. But it was really quiet in there, except for the sound of dripping water. I've been in quiet places before, but the silence in that cave was different. It was complete, and it felt like I was entering a whole new world. I moved slowly through the cold, damp air. My flashlight showed the rough walls and the ceiling dripping with water. All the usual sounds you'd expect in a cave were there, but there was also something else. It's hard to explain. There was a feeling of anticipation. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me, and it made me want to whisper instead of talking, to walk slowly so I wouldn't disturb. Well, whatever might be in there. I'd been exploring the cave for about half an hour, and I can't quite remember what I was doing exactly, just wandering around admiring the formations and such. As I went further in, the passage started to get narrower. The ceiling dripped more, and the air felt thick and musty, like something was decaying. That's when things started to feel strange. I heard a soft rustling sound, almost like feathers brushing against the ground. It was weird, and I remember thinking it was too gentle for a place like this. I got goosebumps trying to listen for it again, but it had disappeared, and everything was eerily quiet. The air seemed heavier somehow, and I started to feel a sense of dread creeping over me. I didn't know why I felt that way, but I knew for sure that I wasn't alone, and little did I realize just how scary things were about to get in that cave. Suddenly, I felt a blast of cold air hit me. It was so icy that it felt like something was squeezing me tight. I realized how incredibly cold it had become in the cave, chilling me right down to my bones. It was the kind of cold that messes with your mind, and that feeling of being watched, well, it intensified into something that felt really intrusive and personal. It made me feel jumpy, and I was frightened. And there's no other word for it, but I was scared, and I still can't explain what happened next. I just felt like something unfriendly was watching me. For a while, I didn't see anything inside the cave. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, there was this strange, eerie laughter. It sounded almost like a person, but not quite. The sound bounced off the walls, making it seem like it was all around me. It made me feel really scared. Quickly, I turned around, shining my flashlight everywhere, and guess what? I saw something strange. These glowing red eyes staring at me from deep within the cave. Even though it was all dark and confusing in there, I could tell those eyes weren't human, and they were just too intense and really scary. I was sure whatever it wasn't human, so I didn't waste any time. I ran as fast as I could, and it was like my instincts were shouting at me to get out of there, so I listened. Every part of me was yelling to escape, so I didn't stop. I hardly remember how I managed to get out of that cave. I was really, really scared, and all I could think about was getting away from whatever was in there. I must have been running through that cave faster than I ever ran before. The whole thing was like a blur. Next thing I knew, I found myself outside, breathing heavily under the bright moon. I collapsed right there, too shocked to move, and after a while, when I finally calmed down, I had only one big question swirling in my head. What in the world was that? I've heard stories about skinwalkers, these mythical creatures that can turn into any animal, but I never really believed them. But there it was, right in front of me, real and absolutely terrifying. Could it be that I had come face to face with something from legend, or was it something from reality? I couldn't say for sure. All I knew was that whatever it was, it didn't belong in my world. It wasn't a part of anything I considered safe or normal. Yet it existed, unquestionably real and incredibly spooky. Since that night, it's something that I struggle to understand. Did I step into the boundary between what we know and what people only talk about in stories? What really happened to me in the Bell Witch Cave? I guess I might never find out. I guess I have to be okay with not knowing. I hope that as I go on, I can still tell what's true from what's just a tale. I think that's what's scaring me the most. The idea that I'm having trouble trusting even my own thoughts. It's like my mind is all mixed up, and that's really unsettling. When I first moved to the city, I thought I was leaving all things nature behind. No more lush trees, no more animals rustling in the woods, just towering buildings and bustling streets. But life had a different plan for me, leading me to a job at City Animal Care. My duty was to assist lost dogs in finding their way back home and to ensure pesky critters stayed out of people's homes. It's interesting how even in the heart of the city, nature always manages to carve out its space. But the tale I'm about to share isn't about those little creatures scurrying around, and it's not about dogs either, so don't fret. Let's talk about cats instead. You might think cats are a common sight everywhere, but not in our city. Well, not the regular kind, anyway. There aren't supposed to be any cats wandering about, but I've come across some that are downright peculiar. These cats aren't like the ones you might have as pets. They're enigmatic, and no one seems keen to discuss them, so my colleagues at City Animal Care brush off my stories, and even the police don't show much interest. But I know you'll lend me your ear, won't you? Typically, I work with a partner for safety reasons, but that night I found myself flying solo. It seemed like any other evening except for the brilliance of the full moon illuminating the sky. A call came in about strange noises near someone's trash cans. They suspected it might be a bear, but bears rarely venture into the city. I figured it might be a hefty dog or perhaps a raccoon causing a ruckus. As I approached the house, it became evident that the noises weren't of the canine or raccoon variety. The glint in my flashlight wasn't like that of a dog. It resembled more of a feline's gaze. A soft growl urged caution as I scanned the bins with my light. I reached for my trusty pepper-scented spray, ready for whatever lay ahead. Then I spotted it. It was sizable, with eyes set wide and pupils like thin slits. Its fur was sleek and short, suggesting it was built for speed. Yet, there was an air of peculiarity about it, something unsettling. It seemed hungry, as if it yearned to chase and confront me. Its lips curled in a threatening hiss, and its tail danced, stirring shadows around it. Darkness seemed to cling to its coat, swirling like tendrils of smoke. I didn't stick around to witness its intentions. I made a swift retreat to my vehicle and advised the residents to remain indoors. But when I glanced back, the creature had vanished. My colleagues dismissed my account, attributing it to a large dog, but I remained steadfast in what I had seen. The following week, I heard noises outside my own residence. I glimpsed those same luminous eyes and that flickering tail. The cat had trailed me home. I endeavored to relay my encounters to my co-workers and the authorities, but they either scoffed or disregarded my claims. Nevertheless, I'm convinced I'm not the sole witness to these occurrences. Now, these cats persist in their vigil outside my home each night, observing and waiting. Why they've singled me out remains a mystery, but I must find a means to dispel them. Can you assist me? I've lived in New York City all my life, bouncing from one not-so-nice place to another. You see, I've seen some really strange things in my time. It's like there's never a day that's just normal. And let's talk about rats, especially here in New York City. I've seen some huge rats in my day, some even as big as dogs. But this one rat I saw, oh boy, it was straight out of a scary movie. I've been working at this restaurant for a while now. Nothing fancy. Just a way to pay the bills. But let me tell you, it's given me stories I'll never forget. Normally, going down to the basement is no big deal. Turn on the light, grab what I need, and get out. But this time was different. The basement door was wide open, which was odd because I always lock it. I went down the stairs, trying not to let my nerves get to me. As soon as I set foot on the basement floor, I heard a noise. It sounded like scratching, like something was scurrying around. I looked around and there it was. At first I thought it was just another big rat, but this one was huge. I mean, it must have been as big as a big dog, like a mastiff. Its tiny, shiny eyes glared at me in the dim light. Its fur was all patchy and mangy, and its tail was as thick as my arm. And those teeth, sharp and yellow, like it hadn't eaten in forever. I was frozen in fear. I didn't know what to do as the rat stared at me, sizing me up. Then it started moving, slow at first, but then it charged right at me. I grabbed a broom nearby and swung it at the rat, but it snapped the broom in half like it was nothing. I had to dodge out of the way as it crashed into the wall with a loud thud. Now I was in survival mode. The broom was useless, so I had to think fast. The rat charged at me again, but this time I grabbed a trash can and swung it with all my might. It hit the rat square in the face, sending it sprawling across the floor. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed the rat by its tail and dragged it towards the door. It was heavy and squirmed in my grasp, but I was determined to get it out of there. Finally, I kicked the door open and tossed the rat out into the alley. It made a sickening thud as it hit the ground, and I quickly slammed the door shut behind me. I was exhausted but relieved. I had faced down the giant rat and lived to tell the tale. From that day on, I made sure to always carry a baseball bat whenever I went into the basement, just in case. Turns out my encounter with the giant rat was one for the record books. It was the biggest rat ever recorded. I couldn't believe it, but even though I never saw that rat again, I knew there were probably more out there lurking in the shadows. That night changed me. It made me realize just how unpredictable life can be. I became more cautious, always on the lookout for danger, especially in the basement. I often think about how close I came to being rat food. It's a scary thought, but it reminds me to always be prepared for whatever life throws my way. Weeks had passed since my encounter with the giant rat, but the memory still haunted me. I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease whenever I ventured into the dark depths of the restaurant's basement. Every creak, every rustle made my heart race, fearing that the monstrous rodent would return. Despite my apprehensions, life went on, and my routine at the restaurant continued as usual. However, it seemed like fate had other plans in store for me. One rainy evening, as I prepared to close up the restaurant, a loud crash echoed from the basement. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a chill all over my body. Could it be? Was the giant rat back for revenge? Summoning all my courage, I cautiously descended into the basement, baseball bat gripped tightly in hand. The dim light flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows across the room. I scanned the area, half expecting the massive rat to leap out at me from the darkness. But what I saw was far more terrifying. There, in the corner of the basement, huddled a group of smaller rats. They weren't your average rodents. They were different, mutated almost. Their eyes gleamed with an unnatural intensity, and their fur appeared matted and discolored. As I watched in horror, the rats began to swarm, their numbers multiplying by the second. It was like something out of a nightmare. I stumbled backward, realizing that I was outnumbered and outmatched. With a surge of adrenaline, I swung my bat, fending off the relentless onslaught of rats. But for every one I struck down, 2 more seemed to take its place. Panic set in as I realized that I was fighting a losing battle. Just when I thought all hope was lost, a beam of light pierced through the darkness. It was the restaurant's owner, armed with a broom and a determined expression. Together we fought off the horde of mutant rats, driving them back into the depths of the basement. As the last rat scurried away, we collapsed onto the ground, exhausted but victorious. The ordeal was over, but the memory would forever linger in the back of my mind. From that day forward, I knew that New York City held more mysteries than I could ever imagine. And though I may never fully understand the horrors lurking in its shadows, I would always be prepared to face them head-on, armed with nothing but my courage and determination. When I was growing up in a neighborhood near Washington, D.C., there was this place surrounded by really old forest. It was like the trees were standing guard around our homes. Some houses were so hidden by trees, you couldn't tell where the yard ended. The Civil War left its mark on our area. We'd often find trenches in the woods when we went exploring. The big trees were super old, and the whole place smelled ancient. One weekend during my sophomore year, my buddies and I decided to have a spooky adventure. We watched some episodes of The Walking Dead, and then, for some reason, we had no school the next day. Matt, one of my friends, suggested exploring the woods at night. He said it would toughen us up or something. Greg and I lived nearby, so we agreed to go. The scariest thing we usually encountered in those woods were coyotes. Around 11 o'clock, armed with flashlights, we headed into the dark woods. At first, it was just us, telling scary stories and trying to scare each other. We saw some glowing animal eyes, but they didn't bother us, and we even spotted a fox and some raccoons. But then things got weird. We came across a big trench, and suddenly everything got eerily quiet. It was like all the sounds just vanished, and it was late, and we were in a part of the woods I didn't know well. There were no houses around, and it felt forgotten. The trench seemed deeper than usual, or maybe it just looked that way in the dark, but it gave us all a strange feeling. I've always been scared of the dark, so I blamed it on that. But my friends looked scared too, so we decided to head back. As we turned to leave, I shone my flashlight back at the trench and saw something unsettling, eyes glowing in the dark. They weren't like any animal's eyes I'd seen before, and they were way too high off the ground and glowed an unnatural orange. I alerted my friends and we started walking faster, but then a foul smell hit us, like something rotten. It got stronger as we walked, and when I looked back, those eyes were closer. They were so close that I should have been able to see what kind of animal they belonged to. But it was like my brain couldn't process it. It looked like some huge, monstrous creature on two legs. I think I screamed, and my friends froze. We stared at it, and it stared back with its big shoulders and sharp fangs. Then, without thinking, we ran. But the creature ran too, and it felt like it was getting closer. If our house had been further away, we might not have made it. I was screaming, and the smell was unbearable. The creature sounded terrifying, making hissing and grunting noises, so we didn't dare look back until we reached the edge of the woods. Only then did I feel safe. My friends ran inside, and I risked a glance back. Those eyes were there, glowing in the dark, but then they vanished. We could never agree on what we saw that night, but it was real, and ever since I've been even more scared of the dark. A few years back, I decided to leave the busy city life behind and settled in a quiet town in Virginia. It was a big change, but I wanted a more peaceful and serene environment. I found a job at a small firm where I handle numbers and finances, which is quite different from my previous work at a large company. Though I sometimes miss the hefty paychecks, I'm certain I made the right choice. My old job left me feeling miserable, but now I feel like a whole new person since moving here. My house sits high in the mountains, far from any bustling activity. The closest store is a good 40-minute drive away, making it seem like I'm in the middle of nowhere. But I find solace in being surrounded by nature. It's refreshing to have mountains and trees as my neighbors when I'm not in town working or running errands. Living here helps me see things from a different perspective and keeps my mind clear. As a kid who loved the great outdoors and adventures, I was thrilled to dive back into exploring nature. One sunny day, while hiking through the woods, I stumbled upon a breathtaking river, a hidden gem I had never seen before. My excitement surged, and I eagerly made my way toward the sparkling waters. Suddenly, an eerie sensation washed over me, as if unseen eyes were watching my every move. The air turned chilly, and a weight seemed to settle in the atmosphere, making my skin prickle with goosebumps. Despite the river's beauty, a sense of unease gnawed at me, urging me to leave. Reluctantly, I turned to go, only to catch sight of a shadowy figure in the distance. It didn't appear to be walking, but rather gliding closer with each passing moment, its approach silent yet unmistakable. I stood frozen in fear, unable to budge an inch as the ghostly figure drew nearer. It became clear that she was the apparition of a woman, surrounded by a faint, eerie glow. Her skin was as pale as moonlight, and her piercing gaze bore into me with intensity, as if peering into the very depths of my soul. My heart pounded wildly in my chest, urging me to flee, but my body refused to obey. The ghostly presence floated closer and closer, each step sending shivers down my spine. I longed to escape, to run far away from this haunting encounter, yet I remained rooted to the spot, powerless against the overwhelming fear. With each passing moment, the ghost drew closer until she stood directly in front of me. A chilling breeze swept over me, as cold as if I had opened the door to a freezer. The air seemed to thicken with an otherworldly chill, enveloping me in a shroud of dread. Suddenly, the ghostly figure passed right through me, and a bone-chilling coldness swept over my body. It felt as if lightning had struck me, sending shockwaves through every fiber of my being. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was immobilized, unable to even twitch a finger. It was as though I had been frozen in place, trapped in my own fear. My entire body tingled with a sensation I couldn't shake off, and fear gripped me like never before. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly, each moment dragging by at an agonizing pace. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I managed to turn my head and scan my surroundings. To my immense relief, the ghostly apparition had vanished without a trace, leaving me standing alone in the eerie silence of the forest. Though she was gone, the terror of the encounter lingered, casting a long shadow over the once serene landscape. Following that terrifying encounter, I lost consciousness, and the next thing I knew, I opened my eyes to find the ghostly figure looming over me. Her expression was twisted in a dreadful grimace, her eyes wide with an unsettling intensity. With her arms outstretched, she hovered ominously above my motionless body. Once again, I tried to scream, to break free from the grip of fear, but my voice failed me. Paralyzed with terror, I feared for my life, convinced that her intentions were nothing but malevolent. For what seemed like an eternity, she remained there, a specter of dread casting its shadow over me. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished into thin air, leaving me trembling in her wake. With trembling limbs, I finally managed to muster the strength to rise to my feet. Without a second thought, I fled into the safety of the woods, sprinting as if my life depended on it. Each breath came in ragged gasps, and my heart pounded in my chest as adrenaline fueled my escape. Never before had I run so fast, my sole focus on reaching the safety of home. My thoughts raced as I struggled to come to terms with what had transpired. I attempted to make sense of it all, to convince myself that it was merely a figment of my imagination, but deep down, I knew the truth. There was no denying the reality of what I had witnessed, and it left an indelible mark on my psyche, forever altering the course of my life. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn back to the very spot where I had encountered the ghostly apparition. Despite the fear that gripped me, an inexplicable curiosity tugged at my heartstrings, compelling me to seek out answers. Each time I returned, I hoped to communicate with the specter, to unravel the mystery that had consumed my thoughts. The memory of her haunting visage lingered with me, haunting my every waking moment. Though the encounter had terrified me to my core, it also sparked a deep-seated fascination that refused to fade. The anguish I felt, knowing that such a tortured soul roamed the earth in eternal torment, weighed heavily on my heart. It was a burden I wouldn't wish upon even my worst enemy, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the mysteries that lie beyond the realm of the living. I've made numerous attempts to reach out to her, hoping to offer solace and guide her towards the next phase of existence. Though I haven't crossed paths with her since that terrifying encounter, her lingering presence is palpable each time I return to the river's edge. Determined to help her find peace, I enlisted the help of a couple of my friends who possess a deep understanding of mystical practices. Together we adorned the area with crystals, burned sage to cleanse the space, and performed various rituals. Yet, despite our efforts, the ghostly specter remained tethered to the earthly realm. The energy surrounding the river felt palpably unsettling, casting a shadow of unease over the serene landscape. Its proximity to my home only heightened my resolve to assist the restless spirit in finding closure. Even my loyal canine companion Hector sensed the unnatural aura that permeated the area. Normally a docile and friendly Labrador, his behavior took a stark turn upon nearing the river. The hairs on his neck bristled, and he emitted low growls of warning, refusing to venture any closer. It was a stark departure from his usual love of water, a clear indication that something was amiss. Some of my friends, steeped in the world of the occult, suggested that the spirit harbored malevolent intentions, labeling her as demonic. In a desperate bid to banish any evil presence, I resorted to sprinkling holy water around the area. Yet, despite their ominous warnings, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the ghostly apparition than met the eye. Deep down, I believed that she was not a malevolent force, but rather a tormented soul trapped by the anguish of a past tragedy, unable to find peace in the afterlife. Despite the fear she instills in me, I can't help but feel immense sympathy for her plight, and it often keeps me up at night. The thought of enduring such eternal torment is truly heartbreaking. I firmly believe that only the most despicable individuals deserve such a fate, and it pains me to think that she may be suffering due to some unimaginable trauma she endured in life. Regardless of the circumstances, I am absolutely determined to do everything in my power to help her find peace and move on to the next realm.